The Jane Addams Children's Award has been awarded to a diverse body of children's literature. Books have covered topics like child labor, Japanese internment camps, women's suffrage, gender expression, civil rights, the Cold War, the Holocaust, and the apartheid. Stories have taken place in Haiti, Siberia, Cuba, Afghanistan, and Chicago. They've been about famous names like Martin Luther King and Jane Addams herself, and they've also been the stories of ordinary citizens like Sachiko, a survivor of the Nagasaki bombing, or a fictional Puerto Rican girl growing up in New York in the 1940s. It's an award driven heavily by philosophy and the message of the book, and while craft is acknowledged, there's not a ton of overlap between these books and books who have won award for more craft focused reasons. Uh, for that reason, I thought it would be fun to kind of have these brief splash screens, which again will be very brief, that show covers of winning titles between a certain time period. They're not in order within the slide, just kind of a fun way of showing books that have won, and as a fun activity, you might try to see how many of them you recognize. The award is shaped heavily by the legacy of Jane Addams, and while we're more familiar with her earlier work involving settlement houses, she was really a prolific philosophy and writer and did a lot of peace work at the end of her life. She is quoted saying, "Peace would no longer be an absence of war, but the unfolding of worldwide processes making for the nurture of human life." So really an emphasis on a holistic, complex idea of peace that's not just the ending of war. She was a founding member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was a response to World War I, and she was the first American woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. The award was founded out of the U.S. branch of the Women's International League, and specifically an educational arm of this organization, which called itself the Jane Addams Peace Association, which was formed in 1948. And their purpose was to address the root causes of violence. Because of this, Marta Teal, one of the members, suggested starting the award to really honor authors who were partnering in the work to develop peaceful citizens. And at its founding, the award was given to one winner. Original criteria looks different than the criteria today. In the criteria, it quote says, "Books written with humor and imagination are preferred over those which carry a message in a serious and staid fashion." And then there are 6 listed themes that the book may embrace. So pretty loose criteria there. Overall, the criteria expresses optimism and a real faith in humanity's ability to make a difference and change these situations of war and violence. And again, a nod to literary and artistic merit, although it's not the focus. Was able to get my hands on a copy of the first winner. People Are Important. Here's a page spread. So this particular book is sort of it's a small world type title. Talks about the dignity of each person, and it sort of equalizes the different way we do things and says, those things are not a cause for fear or censure, but rather they're an opportunity to see our universal humanity. So it covers things like where we live, how we greet one another, how we eat. So that's kind of interesting. The award today has definitely been updated and changed. The criteria most recently updated in 2016. There have been years where there's no award. In the 1970s, they started awarding honor titles. They've also sporadically given different awards, one-off awards like Special Recognition, West Coast Honor, and Special Commendation. In 1993, the award split into two age bands, awarding a picture book award to Aunt Harriet's Underground Railroad in the Sky. And that age band was renamed Books for Younger Children in 2005. It's no longer associated with the Women's International League. It's given by an award committee just within the Jane Addams Peace Association. And there is youth involvement in that their children can vote on the finalists. Just glance at the eligibility here. I do want to highlight that coming upon at the end of the month publishing deadline, so books that are published through the end of this month are eligible for the next round of awards. So the criteria adopted in 2016 is definitely less lighthearted than the original criteria. Now coupled with literary and artistic quality, the criteria focuses on how books engage children in thinking about peace, social justice, global community, and equality for all people. It is the nature of the dialogue, response, reflection, and questioning which a book engenders in young readers that is key. So really focusing on the dialogue and the action. There are 6 questions that they want books to address or interact with at least 2 of those questions. We'll look at those when we get to our exemplars, but here's an example of one of the questions. How can people work for power and equality for women throughout the world? And how can people build respect and understanding of differences and of the worth and importance of all individuals and groups? We're going to take a quick visual tour of some recent titles. So, books for younger children, you can see cover everything from Malala to school segregation in California. You can also see Separate is Never Equal is a more decorated title, also won the Sybert in 2015. Again, there's a sort of randomness to how many honor titles there are. There was 1 in 2018 and 2 in 2019 for books for younger children. Sometimes you can see a thematic trend here in the books for older children, focus on race and civil rights. There's some of the honor titles there. So I specifically read 2 books that have won for the category of books for older children. Ghost Boys is a book about Jerome, who is a 12-year-old in possession of a toy gun. A cop mistakes it for a real gun and shoots Jerome. The book flips back and forth between the events leading up to the shooting and then Jerome as a ghost boy navigating the world after his shooting, sitting in on the trial, and interacting particularly with the daughter of the cop who shot him and other ghost boys, one of which is Emmett Till. So you kind of follow him on that journey. The book was written in response to the shooting of Tamir Rice, and I've put up here the 2 questions that I feel this book most interacts with, specifically the idea of books that address racial identities and people of different racial identities having equity and peace. And then specifically this idea of breaking cycles of fear. The book kind of ends with an emphasis on if we point out this fear we have of difference, of other, that people's actions will change. So you can definitely see the legacy of really positive messaging and optimism going throughout, while I felt like perhaps it was a little light on the solution to things like police violence, which perhaps are systemic issues. It is important, I think, to point out how fear is involved in racism, and uncovering that fear can help us in our journey towards being anti-racist. I also read Sachiko, a Nagasaki bomb survivor story. about a young girl living in Nagasaki when the atomic bomb was dropped, and you just see her life and the way it's shaped, the way her family health is shaped, all of this fallout throughout her whole life of trauma, and you can really see how this one instance of war definitely goes past the end of the war. So she is a girl growing up with all of this and sort of wondering what's her place and making sure that something like this never happens again. She interacts with famous peacemakers of the time, and we follow her on that journey. Here are some of the questions from the 6 questions that I feel like this book dialogues with. The idea of true peace meaning more than the ending of war. So again, nodding back to that Jane Addams quote from earlier. Um, and the idea of ensuring justice for all people. So not only is there so much reconciliation and healing and things to be acknowledged about this atomic bomb dropping, but then also how does that lay a burden on us to create peace throughout the world? And then the other question, looking specifically at working together to address problems of war and violence, which are very evident in the sort of controversial actions of the United States, the dropping of the atomic bomb. So again, the ward I just want to emphasize is really based on philosophy and message of books, while sort of just nodding to books that really, they are artistically and literarily strong, but the focus is on the message. And I thought I'd end with this quote. I connected with it as I was thinking about all of the responses to the George Floyd protests, all the book lists that have been created by librarians and teachers and activists. And it is from a book on the Jane Addams Children's Book Award. It says, adults committed to social justice trust story to nurture imagination and build compassion in children. They seek literature focused on concepts of social justice that will deepen, clarify, and expand students' ideas of themselves, others, and society at large. And so I challenge you to continue to put books that deal with these themes and questions in the hands of the children you interact with.